Welcome to the online presentation of Bilingual Perspectives on Language Teaching, the view from the goal. So the important point here is to put language teaching into a broader perspective. So the view from the goal draws from the bilingualism field as well as one's own experience in becoming bilingual. So regarding the summary, or just the last sentence of the summary, I'll call attention to the presentation detailing a paradigm shift from the predominant monolingual second language acquisition paradigm to a developmental bilingual perspective. So the second language acquisition in itself, is a good thing. But the monolingual approach to it then may be problematical in some ways. Whereas a developmental perspective then starts from the student's point of view, from their language and their cultural repertoire that they bring. And so it's not just focusing on the target language, but focusing on where the students pointing towards becoming more bilingual. And regarding my bio, just I call attention to the link that if you can click on that or access this website. So for articles such as how bilingualism informs language teaching, the types of bilingual education, bilingual child raising, and a whole taxonomy of bilingualism series that you can read at your leisure. Some of the other slides, like the levels of bilingualism, is something that I use in the bilingualism classes. And it helps to also show the scope of bilingualism. Let's say on the individual level, and talking about the bilingual development of the person. Family level is bilingual child raising. Societal level is the cultures or language groups in society, or the policies toward especially minority languages and their groups. And then the school level is bilingual education. And then one more level is the academic level of the study of bilingual phenomena. And so then also I have another formulation, which is the types of language acquisition. But the main thing to notice here is that people can have more than one native language. And the so-called a half or the bicultural children in Japan are an example of this. And also a little vocabulary that the L2 is the second or foreign language, and the L1 the native language, of course, and then we'll also get into a C1 and C2 for the native and second cultures. And then with native languages, then we can't just say like a L1 and L2 if they're both native, then it becomes like a, let's say, LA and LB. Okay, so I'm proposing a developmental bilingual perspective as an alternative paradigm for coexistence of the world's languages. And so that is because it's respectful towards the culture and language of the students. And it's only an additive, it just adds language and cultural knowledge to the students without their losing anything. So then I will refer to the monolingual SLA paradigm as just a monolingual or SLA, and developmental perspective I'll just call bilingual sometimes. So the monolingual is informed by second and foreign language acquisition research. So again, it's all good. It's just that the bilingual perspective, it also includes the local culture, knowing the culture of the students, the And the study of first language acquisition is also informative. So for example, how people actually acquire languages. If you look at the baby for like the first year, they just listen, listen, listen. And then after more than a year, then they start speaking. So that informs our practice of for example, children's English, where they're always saying speak, 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 and also, do you speak English? But actually the real question is, did you acquire English? And so there's no hurry to speak, because the acquisition is the real issue. And when the people are in the situation, where it's called for, then they will start speaking for what they're able to do from their linguistic repertoire. And then also there is a bilingual acquisition research, on the so-called simultaneous bilingualism from age 0 or from infancy. Also, the medium of instruction is a big issue, especially in the bilingual education. And so in the SLA approach, then you're using the students' L2, their second language, which is suitable at times. And so I am all for English medium instruction, to where it is wanted. But getting into the monolingual aspect, though, if it's that approach, then it can get into the usually weak types in terms of bilingual education, that citing Baker 2006. So but whereas in the bilingual approach, where the medium of instruction could be the students' native and target languages. So so using a lot of the target language, trying to gain a balance, really, then you get into the strong forms of bilingual education. So, but there's not just to go to an international school and then learn only in the second language. Then students may lose a balance there. So the bilingual education means teaching in 2 languages. So that's what the medium of instruction is, and why it's is so important. And regarding language teaching approaches and the attitude, the so-called native speaker model then may be prohibitive of students' L1 use. And in extreme cases, the language teacher models monolingualism and monoculturalism. So whereas in bilingual methods, the teacher respects the students' native culture, and it may use their native language strategically. So very, very little, sometimes depending on the level of the students. So I often, with the lower level students, I have like the main track is the teaching in English, but the sort of sotto voce, like a second track of speaking more quietly and very quick Japanese, inserting things to bolster the students' understanding. So this saves a lot of time, especially when students are not sure what they should do. And then in the monolingual teacher, says in effect, go where I have not gone. Whereas the bilingual teacher in his or her behavior says, come to where I am functioning now. So the teacher considers the student's standpoint, and models their goal. So rather than just looking to aiming for the target language at all costs. So like in the next category of the goal of education. So if it's just L2 mastery, in some cases, no matter what the cost to a child's native language and cognitive ability. So especially in the case of immigrant children, think of the Ukrainian children coming here, as a poignant case. coming to Japan, and their native language is not useful, not valued here. So they have the threat of so-called subtractive bilingualism, of having the second language of Japanese replace their native language, which can do cognitive damage to the child. So whereas the goal of the bilingual approach is becoming or remaining the bilingual in some cases, to the extent that learners need, so through the maintenance or development of all acquired languages. So especially in Japan, for learners, that being bilingual is over-idealized. And so in effect, then learners can never expect to reach the goal. And so it becomes, the Japanese have a phrase like a tanin goto, so other people's business. And so instead of like having like an imagined community, which some of our students have at Osaka Jogakuin University, of visualizing themselves like in communicating with the L2 community, and sometimes or through the student generated content in podcasts, the students have actually joined the L2 creation community, and very satisfying for them. So then they can consider having sort of bilingual identity. So whereas in the bilingual approach, being bilingual is a matter of degree. So it's not an ideal, that's unapproachable, but actually a matter of degree. And so it's very rare for people to be complete or balanced bilinguals. It's not even needed. Okay, so instead of like never reaching a goal, and then you start from the goal, at least in your perspective. And then next, about language policies and orientation, according to Ruiz, 1984. First, of what we often see in the monolingual societies is assimilationism. So it's usually not explicit policies like where they say, oh, let's assimilate the minority students or the immigrants, but it's assumed and taken for granted or shown by the actions or inaction. And so in Japan, let's say there is no supporting documents in other languages besides Japanese, usually, whereas in Sweden, they give information in 100 languages. So it's a choice, to be assimilationist and or to in the bilingual approach, encourage linguistic diversity, multilingualism, and multiculturalism, and upholding linguistic human rights, which some countries do, which we'll get into next. And so in the orientation dimension by Ruiz, you can consider languages as a problem, a resource, or a right. So in the monolingual approach, then 2 or more languages are considered a problem, problematical. And so the other languages may not be valued. And so, but in the bilingual approach, the language is considered a resource, for the country, for the individual, and a human right. And so some examples of these approaches are the monolingual approach of the US, the UK, such as China and Japan, are assimilationist in their mainstream education. So whereas in some parts of Europe, Oceania, Singapore, or Canada, then they have plurilingual or pluricultural policies. Then regarding when to start more than one language, And so ordinarily, in monolingual countries, it's from about age 6 to 14, where they start, and after the first language is well established, they believe. Yeah, but in the bilingual experience, you can start from 3 months before birth, where the fetus is able to analyze voice patterns, and or starting in infancy, which is called simultaneous bilingualism. And then another dimension is reasons to evaluate your proficiency. So in the monolingual approach is toward standardized proficiency exam scores, high enough or not, for a school entry or for a work position. So very utilitarian. Yeah, but in the bilingual approach, we're looking for sufficient language and communication skills for the needs and purposes of the individual learner. And then another aspect that's important is like the status of the languages. And so in the monolingual approach, the status of a native language is low, and then the target language is high. Whereas in the developmental bilingual perspective, then both are high. The native language and the target language are both valued highly. And then as for like a mode of cognitive functioning, then in the monolingual mode, then the L2 is off or then switched on. So whereas in the bilingual mode, then the two languages are always on, available, and with the wider perspective of the two languages to bring to bear on issues or decisions. So for example, then I can often see situations like from a Japanese perspective, and often it works better as are in this country. And so the bilingual mode is actually similar to what they recently called translanguaging, going back to Ophelia Garcia, 2009. And so actually the translanguaging, for one thing, treats the languages as one system. And but bilingualism research that also has that distinction between treating the language as two systems or one. And so I would go with one system. So if you look at it like you're in a room, and the partition between the languages would be like the byobu screen, in a Japanese room. So, and so not like a door enclosed and opening to the next room of the other language, but both languages are always in the room and with their the background knowledge to bring to bear on situations. And then regarding linguistic development, especially at the individual level. So in the monolingual paradigm, it is additive usually, and in regular language education, until you add the second language to the first, and the further languages in succession, if someone becomes multilingual, or, learning one language after another. But it can also be subtractive, especially for immigrant children, where the second language replaces the first. So whereas in bilingual perspective, it works for additive bilingualism, which could be L1 plus L2, or also LA plus LB if they are simultaneously, developing from childhood, or additive multilingualism. And then regarding cultural identity, and the monolingual paradigm is the monocultural identity, with the L2 regarded as just a tool for communication. So whereas in the bilingual view, it is a bicultural identity, so to the extent desired, bilingual and bicultural identity. And then there are, cognitive benefits of the regular, second language education, increasing amount of language and new meanings, interpretations, and possibly metalinguistic awareness. And so the subtle cognitive benefits. But whereas the bilingual approach has all the benefits of the second language learning plus bilingual perspectives, and the ethical benefits such as less prejudice and more broad-mindedness that my research has shown, and mental health benefits of being bilingual are well known, like a later average onset of dementia. The being bilingual is the only way that has been shown, to ward off dementia by an average of, say, 4 or 5 years. And then regarding life choices, and the monolingual, monocultural, or limited second language individuals' choices in life tend to be bounded by their native language and local community's culture, so their sphere of action is limited. So whereas the individuals who are bilingual to a useful extent can communicate with more than one linguistic community and bridge cultural differences. A greater linguistic repertoire affords more choices and thereby greater freedom. Well, thank you for listening, and check out my writings at the website on the second slide.